Imagine looking into the eyes of, the person you've been married to for 40 years and, well, seeing an absolute stranger.
Yeah.
It's unthinkable. They aren't just misplacing your name in a moment of distraction. Their brain is actively dissolving the physical structures that hold the memory of who you are.
Right. It's terrifying.
It really is. But for millions of families dealing with progressive dementia and Alzheimer's, it's a daily reality. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Thanks. And I mean, that loss of recognition is arguably the most devastating aspect of the disease.
Definitely. And today we're taking a deep dive into the dual reality of Alzheimer's care right now in 2026. We've pulled together an incredibly diverse stack of sources for you.
We really have. We've got the latest clinical trial data from NYU and UCLA, some, deep-level neurobiological research, and also practical on-the-ground caregiving guides.
Right, because our mission today is to understand the mechanics of this disease, like what's actually happening in the brain, but also to look at the deeply human strategies required to connect with those living with it.
Yeah, that human element is so crucial.
Exactly. So whether you're a caregiver on the front lines or someone tracking the latest medical breakthroughs or just, simply curious about the fragility of the human mind, this deep dive is going to completely reframe how you think about memory, identity, and communication. Okay, let's unpack this.
So, to really understand what we're up against, we have to start at the biological root. I mean, before we can even talk about the new treatments, we need to look at the specific destruction happening in the brain that causes that heartbreaking moment of non-recognition.
Right, and that's the part that always confused me, honestly. You hear about people forgetting where they put their keys, which is spatial memory.
Right.
But forgetting your own child feels fundamentally different. What is physically happening when someone loses a core identity like that?
What's fascinating here is that the brain actually separates those tasks
Oh,
entirely.
really?
Yeah. Spatial memory, like navigating a room or finding your keys, that's handled by various parts of the hippocampus. But there is a very specific, highly specialized subregion called the CA2.
The CA2.
Exactly. Its entire job is social recognition memory. It's the region that distinguishes a familiar loved one from a complete stranger.
So it's basically like the VIP list for your life.
That's a great way to look at it, actually.
Yeah.
And to protect that VIP list, the neurons in the CA2 region are wrapped in these physical protective structures called perineuronal nets, or PNN.
PNNs. Okay.
There are these extracellular meshes that stabilize the synaptic connections. So they essentially lock in your long-term social memories so they don't degrade over time.
Wait, so if I'm picturing this right, are these perineuronal nets essentially like a tightly woven fishing net holding the memory in place?
Yes, that analogy is spot on. But in Alzheimer's, that net gets attacked.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there are these enzymes in the brain called matrix metalloproteinases.
That is a mouthful.
It is, yeah. But specifically, we're looking at one called MMP9. In a healthy brain, they're useful. They help remodel tissues. But in an Alzheimer's brain, they become hyperactive.
So they become the scissors.
Exactly. They aggressively cut through and dissolve those protective nets around the CA2 neurons. So the structural integrity holding the memory of your spouse or your child is like literally chemically dissolved.
That is staggering. So the memories aren't just misfiled in a cabinet. The cabinet itself is being eaten away.
Exactly.
But, reading through the sources, there's another layer to this non-recognition that I want to make sure I'm understanding. It's not just the social memory in the CA2 region failing, right? There's also a visual component involved.
Yeah, you're referring to the fusiform face area, or the FF.
Right, the FFA.
This is a really crucial distinction. The CA2 handles the identity, the knowledge of who someone is. The fusiform face area is located in the visual processing stream of the brain, and it handles the physical act of synthesizing facial features.
Meaning how I take a nose, two eyes, and a mouth and instantly recognize it as a human face.
Right. When the FFA degrades, the patient develops a condition called acquired prosopagnosia.
Which is face blindness, right?
Yes, essentially face blindness.
Does that mean their vision actually gets blurry?
No, not at all. Their visual acuity might be perfectly sharp. They see your eyes clearly, they see the shape of your nose, but the FFA can no longer synthesize those isolated features into a recognizable whole.
Wow.
Think of it like looking at a pile of puzzle pieces spread out on a table, but you're entirely unable to perceive the picture on the box. So patients are often fighting a two-front war. The CA2 is losing the social identity, and the FFA is losing the ability to process the visual geometry of a face.
That paints such a stark picture of what the patient is experiencing. clinically speaking, where does this profound loss of recognition usually happen in the timeline of the disease?
Medical professionals use staging tools, like the FAST scale, to track the progression. The loss of familial recognition typically marks stage 6,
And stage 6 is classified as what?
moderately severe dementia. It's a heavy milestone.
And how long does a patient usually stay in that stage?
It averages about 2.5 years. This is also the stage where patients begin to need significant help with basic daily activities.
Like ADLs, right. Dressing, bathing, things like that.
Exactly. In fact, for a patient to be eligible for hospice care, they usually need to be at this stage 6, or the final stage 7, coupled with a 6-month life expectancy from another secondary condition,
Like what kind of condition?
like aspiration pneumonia, which is very common in late-stage dementia.
Right. Okay. So if we know these MMP9 enzymes are acting like scissors and we know exactly what they're destroying, why can't we just give a patient a drug that stops the scissors?
It's a logical question, but neurobiology is, well, rarely that simple. If you just block MMP9 entirely, you disrupt all the healthy tissue remodeling it's supposed to be doing elsewhere in the body.
Uh,
For decades, Alzheimer's research felt like a graveyard of failed clinical trials because the brain is so incredibly complex to safely target. For years, all medicine could offer were drugs that managed symptoms, like Dunpezil or Memantine.
right.
They might temporarily boost attention or language, but the underlying fire was still burning.
But the landscape in 2026 is fundamentally different, right? The sources outline a massive shift toward disease-modifying therapies or DMTs.
The paradigm has entirely shifted. Instead of just managing symptoms, modern medicine is now directly targeting the underlying cause of the neurodegeneration.
Which is the accumulation of toxic amyloid plaques in the brain.
Exactly.
Let's slow down there for a second because amyloid plaques is a term thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
How do these plaques actually choke the brain?
Okay, so beta amyloid is a protein fragment that naturally occurs in the brain. In a healthy system, it gets broken down and cleared away.
Like taking out the cellular trash.
Right. But in Alzheimer's, these fragments accumulate and clump together into hard, insoluble plaques between the neurons. They block cell-to-cell signaling at the synapses and trigger severe inflammation. And eventually, the neurons die.
Wow.
So the new disease-modifying therapies are essentially molecular cleanup crews sent in to clear those clumps out.
And the diagnostics for finding those clumps have leveled up too. We're no longer waiting for someone to show severe cognitive decline to just guess it's Alzheimer's.
Exactly. We now have highly sensitive blood-based biomarker tests. The FDA recently approved a test called LumaPulse for adults 50 and older,
Okay.
and another called Alexis for those 55 and older. These tests detect the specific proteins associated with amyloid plaques long before severe symptoms appear.
I assume early detection is critical because you want to send in that cleanup crew before too many neurons have actually died.
Precisely. Now, the FDA is careful to note that having plaques alone doesn't guarantee an Alzheimer's diagnosis. I mean, some healthy older adults have them without developing dementia.
Right, that makes sense.
But it's a massive leap in giving patients a head start. Which brings us to the breakthrough treatments, the monoclonal antibodies.
Like lecanemab, also known as Leqembi, and donanemab, or Kisunla. The clinical data on these is wild.
It really is.
Kisunla slows cognitive decline by 35%. That is buying people real, meaningful time with their families. And there's a huge update for Leqembi in 2026. It just got FDA approval for an at-home injection.
The significance of that at-home approval cannot be overstated. Previously, patients had to travel to a specialized clinic for regular 5E infusions.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. When you're dealing with a dementia patient who might be confused or agitated by new environments, forcing them into a clinical setting every few weeks is a massive logistical and emotional burden for the caregiver.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
So simple, once-weekly at-home injection changes the game for accessibility and quality of life.
It's an incredible step forward. But, when I was reading about the drugs in the pipeline, one thing really stood out. Why is it so incredibly difficult to get these medicines to work in the brain in the first place?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Because you mentioned a trial drug called trontinemab that uses something called brain shuttle technology. What is it shuttling past?
It's shuttling past the blood-brain barrier.
Okay.
Think of the blood-brain barrier as an incredibly strict microscopic bouncer at the door of an exclusive VIP club.
Okay, I like this analogy.
The brain is the VIP. The blood vessels in the brain are lined with tightly packed cells that prevent toxins, pathogens, and large molecules in the bloodstream from crossing over into the brain tissue. It's a brilliant evolutionary defense
Well, it
mechanism.
becomes a huge problem when you're actively trying to send a large medicine molecule in.
Exactly. Monoclonal antibodies are massive molecules. The bouncer takes one look at them and says, you aren't getting in.
Right.
Only a tiny fraction of traditional antibody treatments actually make it across. So trontinemab uses this proprietary brain shuttle technology, which essentially attaches the antibody to a molecule that already has a VIP pass.
Oh, that's clever.
It is. It actively transports the medicine across the barrier to clear plaques much more efficiently. And there are other promising pipeline drugs, too, like blarcamazine, which is an
Whoa.
oral pill targeting the sigma-1 receptor to help clear out cellular garbage.
Wow. An oral pill would be amazing.
And ALZ-801, which is showing promise for people who carry the APOE4 gene, which is a major risk factor for Alzheimer's.
That is brilliant. And the sources point out that researchers aren't just relying on pharmaceuticals either. Some of the most promising interventions are entirely non-drug therapies.
Yes, and while we need to view these with cautious optimism, the mechanics are fascinating. There are trials using transcranial photobiomodulation.
Transcranial what?
Photobiomodulation. It's basically near-infrared light therapy aimed at stimulating cellular energy in the brain.
Oh, wow.
There's also 40 hertz flicker light and sound therapy designed to stimulate specific brain waves and potentially slow brain volume loss.
My favorite from the reading was the focused ultrasound.
It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does.
They use highly targeted high-frequency sound waves to temporarily and safely loosen those tight junctions in the blood-brain barrier.
So they're basically bypassing the bouncer.
Exactly. It's like temporarily opening a heavily guarded gate, letting the therapeutic drugs rush in, and then the gate closes back up behind them.
It's amazing what we're capable of. But I want to pivot here because we have to ground this in the current reality. As incredible as a 35% slowing of decline is, it is just a slowing.
Right.
It is not currently a sure. Patients will eventually continue to decline. The factual memory of their life will fade.
Which forces us to ask a very profound question. When the facts are gone, what is left?
Here's where it gets really interesting. When I was reading the psychological sources, I kept thinking of memory like a piece of music.
Okay.
Factual memory or semantic memory is the lyrics. Emotional memory or episodic memory is the melody.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
Thanks. As the disease progresses, the lyrics just vanish. The patient doesn't know the year, the city they live in, or your name. But the melody lingers. How does that biology play out in everyday care?
Well, it comes down to the survival of a tiny almond-shaped structure deep in the brain called the amygdala.
The amygdala.
The amygdala is the brain's primary emotional processing center. Structurally, it tends to survive much longer than the hippocampus where those factual lyrics are stored.
Wow, okay.
Because of this, patients experience what we can call the emotional aftertaste of an interaction long after the factual details of the event are entirely erased.
Can you give me an example of how that looks in practice?
Sure. The sources gave a very common scenario. Let's say a caregiver is helping a patient take a shower. The caregiver is stressed, maybe running late for an appointment, and they are short-tempered, physically rough, and rushing the patient through the process.
An hour later, if you ask the patient about the shower, they will have absolutely zero factual recollection that a shower even took place.
None. The lyrics are gone. But the emotional memory of feeling rushed, feeling unsafe, feeling like a burden, that stays.
Because the amygdala holds on to it.
Exactly. And the result is that for the rest of the day, the patient might be highly agitated, combative, or aggressively refuse to eat their dinner, and nobody in the room knows why.
And conversely, the positive applies too, right? A genuine smile, a gentle touch on the arm, an unhurried tone of voice. These create a lingering, positive emotional association.
Absolutely.
It seems like people with dementia become incredibly perceptive to nonverbal cues. They might not understand the words, but they perfectly understand the behavior if someone is like patronizing them or talking over them as if they aren't there.
They absolutely do. Which brings us to the most difficult part of caregiving, communication. When you are interacting with someone whose factual reality is completely disconnected from your own, how do you talk to them?
Right. Say you walk into the room and your mother firmly believes it is 1975. She says she needs to go to work and she is looking for her deceased husband. Our desperate instinct is to correct them. Mom, it's 2026. Dad passed away 10 years ago. You're retired. The sources call this reality orientation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, reality orientation is essentially forcing someone to watch a complex movie in a language they do not understand, and then getting angry when they can't follow the plot.
Yeah.
For early-stage dementia, gentle orientation can sometimes be helpful. But in moderate to severe stages, it is disastrous. It causes immense anxiety, fresh grief over the loss of the husband, and inevitable combativeness.
So what does this all mean for the caregiver? The alternative that the sources highlight is validation therapy, right? Pioneered by Naomi Fail.
Yes, Naomi Field's work is foundational here. The core philosophy is that instead of dragging the patient into our reality, we choose to learn their language. We focus entirely on the emotional truth of what they're saying, rather than the factual accuracy.
The caregiving guides provided some fantastic anecdotes of this in action. Take the story of Randy and Ann from the A-Train Education source.
Right.
Randy is a patient with moderate dementia. He's sitting comfortably in the day room and is the caregiver who just pulled a grueling double shift. She's exhausted. She comes in loud, says, "Come on, Randy, time for breakfast. Stand up, let's go," and grabs his arm.
And Randy, who has no idea what time it is or what breakfast even means in that moment, just experiences a loud stranger grabbing him. He pulls away. He resists.
And then he probably gets labeled as a combative patient.
Exactly.
Mm.
But the validation therapy approach flips that dynamic.
Mm.
A caregiver approaches slowly. They squat down to eye level so they aren't towering over the patient.
Right.
They use a calm tone. And instead of a flurry of demands, they ask a simple, closed question like, "Would you like to join me for breakfast?" It gives the patient the dignity of a choice.
There was another story about a physical therapy aide named Lauren that really drove this home for me.
Yeah.
She walked up to a new patient and cheerfully said, "Hi, my name is Lauren." The patient looked right at her and said, "Hi, moron."
Which sounds incredibly rude, and, most people would get defensive.
Totally. But Lauren stopped and analyzed the situation. She realized the patient had severe hearing loss. The consonant L and the R sound in her name are notoriously hard for hearing-impaired seniors to catch.
Ah, right.
So the patient wasn't being insulting at all. They were just trying to fill in the sensory gaps of what they thought they heard. When you understand the underlying deficit, you completely remove the personal offense.
That's a perfect example. And validation therapy also navigates the emotional needs behind the confusion. There's the story of Polly, a 75-year-old former secretary.
Right, Polly.
Her husband Mel desperately needed her to go to adult daycare so he could continue working and afford their bills. But Polly absolutely refused. She told him she wasn't one of them. She wanted to be useful. She wanted to work.
I have to stop you there because I know where this story goes, and the idea of a white lie feels really uncomfortable. Isn't lying to a patient fundamentally unethical? How do caregivers reconcile manipulating someone they love, even if it's for their own good?
It's one of the most agonizing ethical dilemmas a caregiver faces. In traditional medical ethics, autonomy and truth-telling are paramount.
Right.
But validation therapy frameworks suggest that when a person loses the cognitive ability to process reality, forcing a painful truth upon them repeatedly is actually a form of harm.
Wow, okay.
The white lie is viewed as a last resort, a therapeutic fib used strictly to prevent severe distress or to meet a deep psychological need that facts can no longer satisfy.
So it's prioritizing emotional safety over factual accuracy.
Yes. In Polly's case, Mel and the facility director coordinated a therapeutic fib. They told Polly that the center was hiring and they needed an assistant to help the staff keep the attendees engaged, like handing out snacks, organizing papers.
And Polly enthusiastically took the job.
She did. She got to keep her identity as a secretary. She felt valued. And eventually, the sources say she forgot the premise of the job entirely and just enjoyed being there with her friends.
They met her emotional need to feel useful, even if the premise was fabricated.
Exactly. But we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. Constantly living in someone else's reality, managing their emotions while suppressing your own, takes a monumental toll on the caregiver.
It's exhausting. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss. You are deeply mourning the loss of a person who is sitting right in front of you. It's a psychological paradox. So how do caregivers survive this, and how can activities actually help both the patient and the caregiver's mental health without just adding to the burnout?
This is where psychological frameworks for the caregiver, like acceptance and commitment therapy or ACT, become vital. ACT helps caregivers accept the painful emotions of ambiguous loss without judgment, rather than constantly fighting them. And when it comes to shared activities, reminiscence therapy serves a beautiful dual purpose. It stimulates the patient's remaining neural pathways while giving the caregiver a moment of meaningful connection.
Reminiscence therapy targets what researchers call the reminiscence bump. I found this fascinating.
It really is.
Even when recent memory is completely wiped out, The memories formed between the ages of 15 and 30 remain highly accessible in the brain. How do caregivers actively trigger that bump?
The key is engaging all five senses. You don't just ask them about their past, you immerse them in it.
Right, because the facts are gone, but the feelings are there.
Exactly. You play the music that was on the radio when they were 20. You use familiar scents, like a specific perfume they used to wear or the smell of a food they used to cook. You use tactile activities like jewelry making.
The sources specifically mentioned jewelry making, right?
Yeah, they note that stringing beads together not only triggers memories of getting dressed up, but the repetitive motion actually improves fine motor skills and significantly reduces anxiety.
And technology is jumping into the space to help caregivers facilitate this. Researchers at Weill Cornell and USC developed a digital platform called the Living Memory Home for Dementia Care Pairs, or LMH4-DCP.
It's a brilliant application of interactive tech. It's a web platform where the caregiver and the patient work together to build a virtual home. It could be a castle, a tree house, whatever they
Oh,
want.
I love that.
Inside this virtual home, they walk down memory lane together with uploaded photos and music.
And they build a wall of fame highlighting the patient's accomplishments. It's not just a passive slideshow, it's an interactive legacy project.
Yeah.
And the studies on this tool showed it significantly reduced what they call pre-death grief for the caregivers.
Which is huge.
It shifted their focus away from the relentless daily management of the disease back to the essence of the person they love.
It creates a shared space of dignity. The caregiver is reminded of the vibrant person they are fighting for, and the patient feels the profound emotional resonance of being honored and loved, even if they can't articulate why.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground in this deep dive. We started by looking at the microscopic destruction in the brain, those hyperactive MMP9 enzymes acting like scissors, dissolving the protective nets around the CA2 region, literally severing the physical ties to social recognition.
Right. And then we explored the incredible medical renaissance happening right now in 2026. From early detection blood tests like Lumipulse and Alexis to monoclonal antibodies like Leqembi and Kisunla that actually clear toxic amyloid plaques.
And the innovative brain shuttle technology with trontinemab fighting past the blood-brain barrier.
Exactly.
But most importantly, we explored the deeply human element of care. We learned that while the factual lyrics of memory fade, the amygdala preserves the emotional melody. We saw how validation therapy prioritizes a patient's dignity over being factually correct, and how reminiscence therapy can ease the crushing weight of ambiguous loss.
Which brings up an important question to leave you with. If rigorous neurological research proves that our emotional memory, basically how we make other people feel, is the very last thing to fade from the human brain, how should that change the way we interact with everyone in our lives today, regardless of their cognitive health? Are we spending entirely too much of our energy trying to be right on the facts when we should be focusing on the emotional resonance we leave behind?
That's something that will stick with me for a long time. Because in the end, when the lyrics of our lives fade away, the melody really is all that's left. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take these insights and maybe a little more patience into your own lives. Until next time.